Hey there Warhammer fans, it's Poohead189 here and I am celebrating 100 subscribers on my YouTube channel. Well, it's a bit more now, but it happened quickly and it took me a bit to get this video ready. Anyway, as you all know, I'm not only a huge Warhammer fan, I'm a fanatic of the Dwarfs. So as a special thanks to you guys for subscribing, I'm making a video on the most infamous class of dwarfs in the setting, the Slayers. If you're not familiar with what a Slayer is, I'll give a description, but it's somewhat difficult to do. Mostly because dwarf honor is a tricky subject. The basic way to describe a Slayer is a dwarf that has been dishonored by his own doing, technically. Dishonored beyond recompense with money, land, or favors. Usually. If such a thing occurs, a dwarf will take the Slayer Oath, and once they do, they have a chance to regain their honor. Now, what a Slayer does is they renounce their name, clan, family, their entire life. Once they take the oath, they're effectively already dead to their families. Though they do go by their names, and they can keep their friends, and I believe they can still contact their family, though if anyone asks their family how their son or uncle or father is doing, and if they're now a Slayer, then the family will tell whoever's asking that they are dead. What a Slayer does is both simple, yet tricky at the same time. A Slayer is supposed to seek honorable death in combat, and though they seek death in combat, and they seek combat, they can never let someone kill them. The idea is that they slay as many enemies as possible until they themselves are slain. In order to atone for whatever they did to gain dishonor on them, they must die in this fashion, while also doing their best to fight to live. If a Slayer fails this mission, they are forced to forever walk the halls of limbo until someone else can help clean the stain of their honor, usually a descendant. If a Slayer dies of old age, they fail their Slayer Oath. If a Slayer dies of disease, as unlikely as it is since dwarf bodies are so resistant to sickness, they fail their oath. If a Slayer dies in an accident, I suppose it would depend on the accident, but almost every instance of an accident would be insufficient in their oath. Perhaps the gods would give mercy if it was an accident made during their attempt at finding an honorable death, but that is still highly unlikely. The dwarf gods are much like their people, unflinching and unforgiving. Now, to some of you who aren't familiar with dwarf honor and Slayers, let me give an example. Let's say there's a dwarf named Burundi Malgrimson, a dwarf of one of the northern holds, likely Karak Kadrin or Karak Grom, and the hold is being attacked by a large chaos incursion full of Northmen and demons. The dwarfs of the hold, wishing to keep the trade routes open and not afraid of the Kurgan scum, march out of their hold and fight them in the mountain passes. They fight from dusk until evening for 10 hours of non-stop brutal combat. The dwarfs, standing firm in the face of the chaos spawn, hold them off with a stubbornness only the Dawi could muster. Suddenly, a part of the dwarf line is assailed by a large demon or a blood beast, some spawn of the wastes, huge and dangerous beyond belief. The monstrosity attacks Burundi and his comrades, who fight valiantly against it. And yet, during the course of the fight, Burundi drops his axe. It could be from exhaustion, having hewed with it for hours. It could be from the sweat coating his hand, a simple accident. He could have dropped it for any number of reasons, but whatever the reason, he did. And because he did, the dwarf next to him did not have adequate protection for but a moment and was killed. Burundi's honor is now forfeit. Burundi could pick up his axe and in a fit of rage slay the beast himself, single-handedly. He could turn the tide of the battle and save the dwarf forces from utter destruction. But yet he failed. He failed his fellow comrade, who died because of his failure. Now, a dwarf could take the Slayer Oath to pay for any dishonor, truth be told. It depends on what the dwarf in question considered so dishonorable that he must do so. But technically, he could owe another dwarf 12 gold coins, and he decides to take the Slayer Oath because he either cannot pay it back, or dishonors himself by choosing not to. It's difficult to say. If a dwarf loses a precious heirloom of his family, or if he insults or dishonors another dwarf too harshly, or if he messes up another dwarf's work, or if he is hired to do work but does it poorly, he can be dishonored, and many times he can pay off the dishonor with gold or labor, but sometimes a dwarf feels so guilty he takes the Slayer Oath instead, and his honor is cleansed with his death in combat. However, back to Burundi. What is Burundi to do now? Now that he is to take the oath, where does he go? Well, technically, he can go to any shrine of Grimnir or even consult any knowledgeable person in his family on what to do next. But many dwarfs go to Carrick Gadrin to the Temple of Grimnir to take their oaths there. But what he does next, essentially, is take his oath. What that means is that they swear they will seek death in combat in Grimnir's name. They will then take a knife and shave their heads until all that is left is a center tuft of hair. Some dwarfs are even so shamed they shave their beards as they feel they are unworthy of them, but this is very rare. After they shave their heads, their remaining hair is dyed red and then coated in pig grease to stand up into the famous Slayer mohawk, or crest. They do this to take on the likeness of Grimnir, who is the patron god of dwarf warriors, battle, and slayers. A dwarf can have multiple crests, however. A scholar on dwarf studies from the Empire, Heinrich Altendorf, has theorized that different mohawks or crests denote what the slayer is most adept at slaying, or what it prefers to slay. For example, a single crest can mean a slayer of trolls or dragons, and a three-spike crest may mean that a dwarf is a slayer of demons and other servants of the ruinous powers. Burundi will then shed his armor, giving it to his family or selling it, but a dwarf slayer must be unarmored. They are bare-chested with simple trousers, but they are allowed to wear jewelry or trinkets if need be. Many dwarfs also put on ritualistic blue tattoos in Kazalid, the language of the dwarfs, though as far as the scholar can tell, it is not required. A lot of the tattoos can be runes against range attacks, however, because they prefer to die in close combat. Burundi will then take at least one axe as a weapon, though I do not believe throwing axes are allowed. He needs to fight a melee, as I said. A slayer can handle any sort of melee weapon, but as the axe is the traditional weapon of Grimnir, almost every slayer wields one as a weapon. It could be single-headed, double-headed, broad-headed, long, short. There could be two axes, but almost always it is an axe. Upon the oath, Burundi has renounced his inheritance, his family, and his life, and then leaves to go and seek a doom worthy of Grimnir. He could do what many slayers do, and that is follow a dwarf army into battle. There are entire contingents or armies of slayers that tag along beside professional dwarf armies, following them toward a battle where they might seek a worthy doom. Otherwise, a slayer must seek out a doom. Many become mercenaries to make a living until they can find their doom, like Gotrek Gurnison. A dwarf slayer that has lived a long time is one of the most dangerous warriors you're ever to meet. They've been fighting for years against all manners of monsters and foes, and none have been able to kill them. Truth be told, you never want to fight even a young slayer, for they have nothing left to lose and everything to gain in seeking your demise in any suicidal way they can. Once the slayer dies, he is then sent to the halls of Grungni, but even then, a slayer is still meant to find battle. It's somewhat like Valhalla. While the other non-slayer dwarfs sit at the table with Grungni and Valya and the lesser dwarf gods, the slayers fight wave after wave of beasts and monsters in the fields outside of the hall, and once they die, they appear back in the hall to sup and eat for a short time before charging back into battle once more, to give glory to Grimnir, who was not present at the hall. The slayers continue to fight as Grimnir does, for the dwarf god marched north thousands of years ago, holding off the tides of chaos single-handedly, his first kill being the demon prince Kragan Ome Nanthal, scion of Korn, and once the prince was killed, Grimnir sent his only son Morgrim back alone, giving him one of his axes. Grimnir remained, and for centuries he has held chaos at bay. Some say he fights within the Chaos Wastes, and others believe he fights and holds off a ruptured warp gate under Middenheim, but one thing is certain, Grimnir fights, and so shall his slayer followers, even after death. Praise be to Grimnir.